Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, it's been about 10 months since I did my last guild raid guide. I was reflecting on just how much has changed in the game since the last video, and I realized that there are now 7 different categories of guild raid bosses. Rather than recreate that content in a single video and compress lots of information into a short space of time, I have decided to do longer single boss videos. It will take more time and editing overall, but I think the viewers, yourselves, will appreciate the value. We'll start with Szarekh, the Necron Silent King. He is an older boss at this point in time, but has a reasonable amount of nuance in how the fight goes, and there are lots of gains to be made by understanding the boss and his mechanics. Szarekh is unique because he's the only boss in the game with a 1 hex footprint. That means that it can be much harder to pin him in position. He has a melee and ranged attack, and his ranged attack is at 2 hexes, which is important for reasons that we'll come back to later. In terms of abilities, Szarekh has 3 active and 3 passive abilities. The first active ability is Breath of Silence. This summons 4 Deathmark Necron summons within 2 hexes from his starting throne hex. His next active ability is Annihilator Beam, which causes his Triarchal Menhirs to create a delayed artillery-style attack on the battlefield. This does high piercing damage and can often destroy your own units if you remain on the marked hexes. Thankfully, this is an ability that you can completely get rid of by killing both of the boss primes, and I'll come back to the primes later on. His final ability is called My Will Be Done. This triggers an additional attack from his friendly Necrons on the battlefield, so essentially he will cause the summoned Deathmarks to attack again. Each of these abilities has cooldowns as well, which I'll get more into later on. The Silent King's passive abilities are a little bit less exciting but still worth paying attention to. Relentless March gives bonus movement to adjacent summons and also provides them with more healing. Obeisance Generators causes a reduced number of hits if a unit has just arrived into melee contact that turn. This reduces hits from a character by 2 and summons by 3 to a minimum of 1 hit. Finally, Noctilith Beacons. This just means that Szarekh and adjacent Necrons take 40% reduced damage from enemies with a Psyker trait. With the basics out of the way, let's get into the gameplay and analyze the segment that I will call the opening. I'm using some older replays on this map, which you might recognize as the legendary 5 Szarekh map from last season. The first thing that you'll probably notice from these clips is that Sarekh's boss behavior is not completely predictable, at least on turn 1 when you compare it to other bosses. On screen here you can see that we do the same start in both of these clips, and in the first clip on the left, Szarekh comes down off his throne to attack us, and in the second clip he remains on his throne and summons his Deathmark Necrons. I've spoken to Snowprint developer Kyle about this previously, and you can see his response here on screen. Essentially the behavior here is random, but there are certain things that you can do to improve your odds of Szarekh coming down. Presenting a so-called attractive target by putting a unit on the razor wire causes the boss to salivate and potentially target that unit over others. You might be thinking to yourself, well, why does this matter? It's simple. The most important skill to learn for any guild raid boss in the game is how to get the high ground. When you attack from the high ground, your units deal an extra 50% damage. That isn't a 50% increase to their damage stat, it's a 50% damage increase to their final damage amount. So you get to add damage buffs like Eldryon or Calgar, as well as critical hit damage, before calculating Damvar and then applying 50% damage bonus to that final amount. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time laboring that point because it's incredibly important. Increasing your total damage by 50% essentially gains you a free guild raid ticket every 2 battles, compared to runs where you cannot gain the high ground. On this slide here I have made note of the different elevation levels and correlated them all in the test build. The key is shown over on the left hand side of the screen, and on this particular map the game codes 5 different elevation levels, described as level 0 to level 4. So back to the gameplay. Szarekh has not come down off his throne on turn 1 to attack us. He is therefore on an elevated hex, and if we try and engage him straight away, then we will be unable to gain the high ground on him for the remainder of the fight. So what can we do to salvage the situation when Szarekh doesn't come down off his throne? The key response is to kill at least 2 of the death marks while remaining outside of Sarekh's 2 hex attack range. What this means is that on Sarekh's turn 2, he'll be forced to run down off the throne to attack you. Once he is run down off the throne, whether you've managed that successfully on turn 1 or on turn 2, you're now in the mid-fight phase. If Szarekh didn't summon his death marks on turn 1, then you can plan knowing that he will summon his death marks on turn 2. If he summoned on turn 1 and ran down on turn 2, then the thing to keep in mind is that the summon ability for the death mark appears to have a 2-turn cooldown, at least based on my real game experience. Once Szarekh is down off his throne, you can largely ignore the newly summoned death marks. You should focus all of your hits, when possible, directly on the boss and on maintaining a surround on him. The key concept for this phase is trying to keep the high ground while attacking Szarekh. This replay shows a team that I used to run with some Tau characters combined with Exeter Row and Actus. Szarekh stays in position for 2 reasons here. The positioning of our units in this sort of line mean that he cannot run and gain the high ground to attack us, which he will preferentially try and do whenever possible. You can see here how Eldryon on the left blocks off the high ground, and therefore Szarekh stays in the low ground and attacks an easy target in the shield drones, much to the delight of the rest of our team. Really, the rest of the fight is fairly rudimentary. Remember that both of the active abilities, Breath of Silence and My Will Be Done, both have 2-turn cooldowns. So if they're both on cooldown, then you can be guaranteed that Szarekh will make an attack against one of your units for that turn. Now that we've run through the fight itself, the next question is what thresholds we need to kill the Necron Primes. This is a pretty easy one. I would advise full clearing both boss primes because that knocks the Annihilator beam active out of commission. Not only does it mean it's much easier to position your team, but it also gives Szarekh fewer abilities to use while he remains on his starting throne hex, and therefore increases your potential turn 1 bait. By removing the Annihilator beam, even if you fail the turn 1 bait, he is guaranteed to come down on turn 2, provided you follow the rules and stay at least 2 hexes away from him. What about the best characters? At the moment, the best in slot team for this boss, I believe, is the mechanical team. I've been using Exeter Row, Actus, Tangita, Sho and Eldryon. As a variation of that mechanical core, you can also use Darkstrider and Revas in place of Tangita and Sho. As shown in the earlier gameplay footage, both teams have nuance to positioning and both have comparable damage. I slightly prefer the first team. The problem with the second is that sometimes Revas's drones can run into melee and potentially block Szarekh on his throne, which can cause your entire run to end in disaster because Exeter Row is now no longer able to get into melee. The multi-hit team is okay, but not as good as the mech team. It's just very hard for any non-mechanical teams to compare to the amount of damage that Exeter Row puts out. If you don't have a full mech team, then you can run a multi-hit team and substitute characters depending on your roster. Weirdly, a Skitarii Rustwalker is the best damage dealer in our game by a significant margin, but it is the universe we live in at the moment. The Psyker team with the Neurothrope is a no-go because of Sarekh's passive ability that neuters psychic damage. The only other thing that I would add is probably about the Machines of War. The Biovore is excellent against Szarekh as seen in this clip because the Spore Mines can help lock him in place and prevent him from moving around. It can be expensive given the economy of munitions and potentially requiring multiple uses of the primary ability in one raid ticket, but it is an option for the big spenders out there who want to increase their damage numbers. There you go, hopefully a short and sweet raid guide to Szarekh, the Silent King. I hope that was useful and covered the main points. If you think it's worth me continuing this series for the other guild raid bosses, then please let me know. I've left my referral code up here on the screen. If you're a newer player, I'd love if you could consider entering it. It will earn you 100 Blackstone and support me in the work that I do. It is single use though, so choose who you support carefully. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!